can pick up her phone and call Donald Trump directly, on his mobile, any hour, any day, and get an answer in minutes. That's the kind of power Kimberly Guilfoyle brings to Athens as America's new ambassador to Greece. During the debt crisis, Greece had no such luxury. In 2016, with the state on its knees, Piraeus was sold to China's Costco as the only serious bidder. Today, that same port is Beijing's flagship in Europe and the first testing ground for Guilfoyle's strategy. Soon after arriving, she did something unusual for a diplomat. She openly raised concerns about the extent of Chinese control in Piraeus and the strategic risks for Greece's future. The Chinese embassy reacted immediately, denouncing her remarks as Cold War mentality and malicious attacks. But that's only the beginning. Behind the scenes, Guilfoyle is backing Greece's entry into the F-35 club, deepening U.S. use of Souda Bay and Alexandroupolis, and pushing to turn Greek ports and pipelines into America's energy gateway to Eastern Europe. This is the story of one woman with a direct line to Trump, trying to redraw the map of the Eastern Mediterranean. Will this new power make Greece stronger or trap it between Washington, Beijing, and Ankara? Stay with me until the end to find out. Kimberly Guilfoyle did not arrive in Athens as a stranger. By the time she stepped onto Greek soil as ambassador, every power center in Washington already knew two things about her. She is fiercely loyal to Trump, and she knows how to turn politics into a story that grabs cameras and doesn't let go. For years, she was more than a supporter. She was one of his most aggressive public defenders, on campaign stages, TV studios, and behind closed doors at high-dollar fundraisers. While traditional diplomats speak in careful footnotes, Guilfoyle speaks in headlines. That made her controversial in the State Department, but extremely valuable to one person: the man in the Oval Office. Her connection to Greece begins somewhere very different, in holiday photos, not briefing notes. Long before any official title, she came here as Kimberly in love with Greece, visiting islands with Trump's son, sailing in the Aegean, forming friendships with Greeks in business and media. She admired the churches, the rituals, the mix of ancient ruins and modern chaos. To her close circle, she spoke about Greece not as a chessboard, but as a place she could happily disappear to for a summer. That emotional link became her quiet advantage. When her name started circulating for the Athens Post, it wasn't just another line on her CV. It felt to her like a return. And yet, it almost didn't happen. Inside Washington, her appointment triggered resistance. Career officials and parts of Congress were wary of sending a loud Trump surrogate to a region full of crises: Aegean disputes, energy wars, refugee flows, rising Chinese and Russian influence. For months, her nomination floated in a kind of political limbo. She used that time. Instead of waiting passively, she started studying. Briefings on Greece-Turkey incidents, maps of the Eastern Mediterranean seabed, reports on pipelines, LNG terminals, offshore blocks. She met Greek lobbyists and diaspora figures, listened to ship owners talk about energy routes, sat with think tanks dissecting the future of NATO's southern flank. So when the final green light came, she landed with a script already forming in her head. Her first days in Athens were not about easing in gently. Her schedule immediately filled with high-stakes meetings: the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister on strategy, the Defense Minister, and top generals on security. Then, fast-tracked contacts with ship owners and energy executives who control steel, gas, and routes. From the start, she behaved less like a guest and more like an operator. Someone who had come not just to represent the United States, but to reshape how Greece fits into a bigger game of energy, alliances, and influence. And that game begins with one key battlefield: who controls the new energy map of the Eastern Mediterranean? By the way, only 14.7% of viewers are subscribed. If this kind of deep dive geopolitics matters to you, like and subscribe. Let's keep revealing what others miss. If you want to understand Guilfoyle's mission in Greece, don't start with speeches. Start with a tiny rectangle on a map in the Ionian Sea, Block 2, near Corfu. For years, Greek offshore exploration was mostly theory and press conferences. Then, something changed. U.S. giants ExxonMobil and Chevron stepped in, not just in Block 2, but in enormous deep sea blocks south and southwest of Crete. On paper, these are licenses and concessions. In reality, they are something much bigger: political anchors. Because once U.S. majors enter disputed or sensitive waters, any challenge to those maps stops being just a problem with Athens. It becomes a problem with Washington. South of Crete, these blocks slice straight through the narrative of the Turkey-Libya Maritime MOU. Ankara says one map, Athens says another. With Exxon and Chevron behind the Greek version, Guilfoyle suddenly has a powerful argument. Who exactly are you challenging now? Greece or the companies tied to American power? But Guilfoyle's energy map doesn't end offshore. It begins there. The other half is gas that doesn't come from the seabed at all. It comes on tankers, U.S. LNG. Here, Greece is the door. LNG terminals on the coast become the entry point for American gas into Eastern Europe. From Greek shores, pipelines push that gas north, through Bulgaria, Romania, all the way toward Ukraine and the wider region. This is the vertical corridor. Greece at the bottom, Eastern Europe stacked above it like floors in a building. The strategic goal is simple: reduce dependence on Russian gas and give Washington a finger on the energy valve of the Balkans and beyond. And this is where Guilfoyle's style matters. Infrastructure alone is not enough. You need political guarantees, long-term contracts, regulatory pressure. Her job is to make sure terminals get built, pipes get financed, and governments along the corridor feel safe enough to lock in U.S. gas for decades. But who actually moves this gas? That's where Greece becomes irreplaceable. Behind every LNG deal, there are ship owners, many of them Greek, deciding which fleets to build, which routes to bet on, which suppliers to tie themselves to. In private rooms in Athens, Piraeus, London, New York, Guilfoyle meets the people who command these floating assets. The chain she is trying to weld together looks like this. Gas comes out of American soil, is turned into liquid at U.S. terminals, crosses the Atlantic in Greek-owned LNG ships, lands in Greek ports, and from there, pipelines push it north to Bulgaria, Romania, all the way toward Eastern Europe. For Washington, it's energy security and leverage. For Greek ship owners, it's decades of profitable cargo. For Guilfoyle, it's the perfect intersection of her worlds: American producers, Greek fleets, European consumers. By positioning Greece as both offshore frontier and LNG gateway, she is pushing the country into the center of a new energy web. The more that web tightens, the harder it becomes for any future government in Athens or Sofia or Bucharest to step away from U.S. energy. And in the background, one question keeps growing. If energy is the prize, how does this reshape the balance between Greece and Turkey? That is where Trump's double game begins, with Guilfoyle in Athens and Tom Barrack acting as the trusted go-between in Ankara. To understand Kimberly Guilfoyle's real power, you have to see the Eastern Mediterranean the way Washington does. A fragile chessboard where Greece is the stable ally and Turkey the unpredictable piece. The question is not just how do we keep Turkey in the West, but how do we protect Western interests without putting Greek security and rights at risk? In Athens, Guilfoyle is the official American answer. Her job, make Greece the most stable and reliable pillar of the West in this region. Through Greece, U.S. LNG enters Europe. Through Greek ports and ship owners, American energy moves to markets. Through Greek territory, pipelines, cables, and connections reach Eastern Europe and the Balkans, reducing dependence on Russian gas. Every agreement she supports sends the same quiet message. If you want security, predictability, and clear rules, you work with Greece. A European democracy inside NATO with legal stability, modern ports, and armed forces that actually defend Western borders. Around Ankara, the game looks different. There, the key figure is Tom Barrack, the official U.S. ambassador in Turkey. On paper, he does what every ambassador does. In reality, Barrack comes from a world where money, politics, and foreign policy always mix. For decades, he moved between big funds, Gulf capitals, and Western governments. He knows how investors think, how deals are built, and how power flows through contracts as much as through treaties. For people like him, Turkey is not just a difficult ally, but a huge market, a G20 economy, a NATO army, and a bridge between Europe, the Middle East, the Black Sea, and the Caucasus. For many in Washington and global business, this Turkey is too big to lose. Their instinct: as long as Western banks, companies, and projects stay deeply inside Turkey, Ankara will find it harder to turn fully toward Moscow or Beijing. Business becomes a tool of geopolitics. From Athens, Guilfoyle watches this with mixed feelings. She knows the West does not want Turkey in the arms of Russia and China. She also knows who usually pays the price when Ankara feels untouchable: Greece and Cyprus. Her answer is to strengthen the Greek card. A Greece that offers what Turkey cannot easily offer: political stability, respect for international law, EU membership, and a geography that can host serious infrastructure without constant blackmail. The more Greece proves that it can be the main energy and security hub, the harder it becomes for any informal network around Ankara to ignore Greek interests. This is the real double game. On paper, everyone in the West says Greece is a key ally. In parallel, there is always the temptation to manage Turkey through business and personal contacts, even when Ankara challenges Greek sovereignty. In the next chapter, this quiet tension stops being theoretical. A real crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean will force Washington to choose: the structured Greece-first strategy that Guilfoyle is building, or the flexible, risky approach that keeps betting on Turkey. Everyone expects Kimberly Guilfoyle's first big battle in Athens to be about Turkey: airspace violations, frigates, drills. Instead, her first war is fought in boardrooms and port authorities, under cranes painted in Chinese colors. The symbol is Piraeus. Under Costco, it has become one of Europe's fastest-growing ports, a key maritime gateway of the Belt and Road Initiative. For Beijing, it's an entry point into the EU market. For Athens, it's both an economic lifeline and a pressure point on Greek diplomacy. In Washington, one conclusion dominates: if China turned one Greek port into leverage, it can try again. Guilfoyle's orders are blunt: no second Piraeus, no more Chinese expansion inside Greek strategic assets. If Greece is to be the main Western pillar in the Eastern Mediterranean, its critical infrastructure cannot be split between Washington and Beijing. Athens moves fast. The proposal on Guilfoyle's desk: Elefsina, a historic shipyard and port offered for U.S. strategic investment. A symbolic reversal of the Piraeus era and a signal to Beijing and Ankara that the decisive weight in Greek logistics will now be American. This plugs into the military map she is expanding. Souda Bay, a NATO jewel, becomes a fixed anchor. Alexandroupolis turns into a gateway to Eastern Europe, bypassing the Turkish Straits. Stefanovicchio hosts joint helicopter activity. In Larissa, MQ-9 drones watch the wider region, and Dravida prepares for F-35 operations, Greece secures F-35s, new anti-drone systems, upgraded missile defenses, deeper intelligence sharing. Exercises like Poseidon's Rage and Iniouhos, plus U.S.-Greece naval integration, turn Greek waters into a live laboratory of allied power. But one question shadows every success. Can Greece push back China and contain Turkey without slipping into a new dependence on the U.S.? The test comes from the sea between Crete and Cyprus. A major power grid interconnection between Greece and Cyprus is planned. It would bind Cyprus to the European energy market, reduce isolation, and cross waters Ankara contests. Turkey opposes it fiercely, seeing not cables, but a political line drawn against its ambitions. European companies are keen. Athens and Nicosia are pushing. The missing shield is a heavyweight partner. Quietly, a real question surfaces. Will the United States join the construction consortium? If Washington steps in, directly or via a U.S. company, the grid becomes a strategic asset under the same umbrella as Elefsina, Alexandroupolis, and Andravida. Here, Guilfoyle is pivotal. She must balance support for Greece and Cyprus, the risk of provoking Turkey, and Washington's fear of overcommitment. Her cables to the State Department, talks with energy executives, and messages to Nicosia and Brussels converge on one idea. If the West wants Greece as its main pillar and Cyprus fully tied to Europe, it must stand not only on bases and jets, but on cables and ports. Whether the U.S. joins this consortium will show, more clearly than any speech, which map of the Eastern Mediterranean it has really chosen. In the end, Kimberly Guilfoyle's mission in Athens is not about one base, one port, or one cable. It is about forcing everyone to choose a map. China chose early with Piraeus. Turkey chose with its drilling ships, its drones, its doctrine of Blue Homeland. Greece chose when it opened Alexandroupolis, Elefsina, Souda, and Andravida to an unprecedented American footprint. Cyprus is choosing through deeper energy cooperation with major U.S. and international companies already drilling in its waters, and through projects that connect it more firmly to Europe, not leave it exposed. For Greeks, this is not a plea for protection. It is a demand for a partnership of equals. They do not want to be the weak link in a chain to Washington, but a trusted pillar whose sovereignty and rights are non-negotiable. Guilfoyle knows this. The test for the United States is whether it treats Greece and Cyprus not as instruments of a strategy, but as allies whose security it will stand behind when the red lines are finally challenged on the water. If this analysis helped you decode how Kimberly Guilfoyle's strategy is changing the game for Greece, Cyprus, and the Eastern Mediterranean, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And don't stop here. Watch the videos appearing on your screen right now to follow the rest of the story as it unfolds.